Hey guys, I think I may have stumbled across the anime with the most hypocritical aliens of all time. It's a film that a lot of you may have seen back in the day called A Wind Named Amnesia. When I was younger, I used to rent this 1990 nostalgia bomb every once in a while from the video store, but I don't think I ever really understood what it was going for. But I recently gave it another watch, and a few things stuck out to me that I definitely missed during my first few viewings, so I'd like to share them with you today. We have a lot to cover, so let's get right into it. And by the way, there are going to be spoilers, so fair warning. So our film opens in the city of San Francisco in the far-flung, futuristic year of 1990-something. The city is lying in ruins, and we see a group of people behaving like savages as a decrepit robot stalks them through the empty streets. The people attempt to flee, and when that doesn't work, they fight back, but the robot guns them down in cold blood. Our protagonist arrives just in time to see the massacre, and before he's able to do anything to help, the robot then turns on him. But right when it looks like it might be lights out for our hero, a mysterious woman appears and tells him where to shoot to take the robot down.
Hit the turret. Aim for the turret. That's the nerve center.
Once the menace has been dealt with, the woman approaches our protagonist, who expresses amazement over the fact that she's able to speak. Apparently, this is a novelty in this world. He tries to ask her how she's able to do so, but the woman immediately changes the subject. So, nothing suspicious here. She explains to her new companion that the robot was something called a Guardian that was built to maintain law and order throughout the city. She states that the Guardian must have been on patrol when the wind struck. The Wind Named Amnesia, perhaps? The two characters retire to a safer location, and the mystery woman introduces herself as Sophia. Our protagonist tries to ask her how she knows so much about the Guardian, and again why she can speak, but she states that she'd rather not tell him anything more than her name. Again, not suspicious at all. Sophia asks our protagonist to tell her his story, and he immediately launches into a boatload of exposition about what happened to the world and how it came to be the way it is. He introduces himself as Wataru, and I'm sure it's meant to be pronounced Wataru or something, but everyone in the film just calls him Wataru, so I'm gonna do the same. Wataru starts telling Sophia about someone named Johnny, and this exchange ensues.
Johnny was 13, 3 years younger than me, but Johnny knew all kinds of things that I didn't know.
And when you learned them, you dumped him, huh?
Not quite. He died.
Wataru continues on, explaining that one day, completely out of the blue, a strange wind blew all across the world, stripping every human being of their memories. People were reduced more or less to the state of animals, and every society across the globe collapsed. Sophia presumably already knows most of this, since she's already mentioned the amnesia wind, but this exposition is really for the audience. So we just spend about 10 minutes watching Wataru explain things to Sophia that she should know by now. Anyway, Wataru was also affected by the wind, and for a time he lived like a beast, wandering around and searching for food. His wandering eventually led him to a military compound where he came across this.
Then I saw it. A huge man, with wires attached to his head, his body, his arms and legs, threatening a boy who sat calm and still in an invalid chair.
Okay, so on top of the amnesia wind, we now have a telekinetic super soldier, I guess? He tries to use his psychic powers to attack the boy in the wheelchair, but Wataru intervenes by chucking a rock at the super soldier's head. And the film never really explains why Wataru feels the need to save the boy in the wheelchair here. Just a few minutes ago, we had a scene establishing that his mind was so scrambled by the amnesia wind that he was stealing food from starving children. So I guess this is a bit of a nitpick, but why does Wataru care so much about protecting this boy when he was just willing to attack a pair of children himself? Maybe he could just smell this guy's plot significance. Well, anyway, this causes the super soldier to turn on Wataru, which gives the boy in the wheelchair the opportunity to get a shot off with the gun that he apparently had with him the entire time. With the super soldier now dispatched, the boy in the wheelchair introduces himself as Johnny. He explains to Wataru that the two of them are in a military research facility that used to specialize in turning people into human weapons. The super soldier that they just defeated was one of the experiments at the base, and Johnny was another one. But rather than being given telekinetic powers, Johnny was part of a memory experiment where a computer chip was implanted in his brain. As a result, he's the only person in the world to retain his memories. Johnny brings Wataru into the facility and hooks him up to a machine that's very conveniently able to teach Wataru how to talk and reason and essentially be a human being again. So I guess it's pretty fortunate for Wataru that the military just so happened to be working on this exact memory experiment. Anyway, for a time after that, Wataru and Johnny lived together peacefully, but Johnny ended up passing away, leaving Wataru to wander America alone, trying to see what's left of the country and the world. We're now about 25 minutes into this hour and 20-minute film, and finally we're caught up on the protagonist's backstory. Wataru tells Sophia that Johnny used to believe that the amnesia wind was caused by some kind of alien species, and wonders what the purpose of the wind was. Sophia offers this reply.
I can't answer you. Perhaps I didn't want to destroy man, but simply point him along a different way. Try to make him act in ways which aren't so destructive.
And again, that's not suspicious at all. But no time to dwell on that. Sophia tells Wataru that they should get moving since the Guardian robot that Wataru destroyed is now going to be repairing itself and hunting him down. The pair decide to travel together to New York, but they only manage to make it as far as Los Angeles before coming across a young woman and an older man being hunted by a group of savages. Wataru jumps in to save them, but since the pair have lost their memories, they behave like cornered animals. Sophia then offers to speak to them, and this scene ensues.
It's all right now. It's all right.
We then cut to some time later. Sophia explains that the woman's name is Sue and the man is called Little John. She then tells Wataru that Sue has been chosen by the local people to be the bride of their god, which means that she'll be sacrificed the following day. Sophia says that the god apparently demands a succession of brides, all of whom are sacrificed, and I have to say, this is a pretty complex theological structure considering that these people don't even have a spoken language yet. And throughout Sophia's explanation, Wataru apparently never thinks to ask her how she's communicating with these people. He just takes her at her word without question. Anyway, Wataru is understandably pretty upset by the news of Sue's impending sacrifice, but Sophia tells him this.
Sacrifices were offered to the gods for thousands of years after man first looked up and recognized unknowable forces ruling him. In terms of his history on Earth, the custom was stopped only the blink of an eye ago. And now that the wind has blown away the old restraints, the old certainties, it's not surprising he's returned to it. And you, are you so certain of your own values that you're prepared to impose them unthinkingly on others? To choose their way of life for them? To tell them what is good and what is bad? Demanding obedience by force if necessary?
And, okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, it's pretty obvious by this point that Sophia is not a human being. As it turns out, Johnny's prediction was true, and the wind was caused by an alien race. This isn't confirmed until the end of the film, but Sophia is one of the aliens, and she's come to Earth to essentially judge whether or not humanity's memories should be returned. So at this point, she's preaching at Wataru not to try to decide other people's futures for them, but isn't this exactly what her race has been doing? How is sending down a wind that strips people of their memories not deciding their futures for them? Alright, anyway, the following day Sophia suggests that the group take a trip to the beach. Why does this happen? Well, because boobs, obviously. As soon as the group reaches the beach, Sue yanks her clothes off and the plot grinds to a halt for about 3 full minutes as she frolics in the water. So at least the film's creators had their priorities straight. Anyway, later on that night, Wataru manages to find some alcohol and suggests that the group have a party. But much to his surprise, it turns out that Sue and Little John have already returned to their people. Sophia tells Wataru that Sue had intended to go back all along because if she isn't sacrificed to her people's god, some other girl will be. This infuriates Wataru and he vows to save not only Sue, but all of the other girls as well. Later on that night, he and Sophia find the god that Sue's people worship, and it turns out to be some kind of giant construction robot / weapon. Sophia tells Wataru that the machine could pretty much level a city, and I'm just wondering how practical this thing is. I understand creating a robot to build cities, and I also understand creating robots to serve as weapons, but why would you mix the two? It just seems like construction and warfare are two completely different industries, you know? Anyway, as it turns out, one of Sue's people managed to figure out how to operate the construction / death bot and is using it to control everyone else. Wataru manages to destroy the machine and kill the guy operating it, but not in time to save Sue. Still, with the robot destroyed, her people are now free of their false god, and Little John becomes their new leader. Wataru teaches him a few basic survival skills, like how to open cans and operate firearms, while Sophia looks on approvingly. And I think the idea here is supposed to be that Sophia is impressed by Wataru's ability to see past the superstitions of Sue's people and have compassion on them. But if we connect this with Sophia's larger mission of judging humanity, this really doesn't make any sense. The only thing that makes Wataru exceptional in this situation is that he has compassion for Sue and her people. And the only reason that's exceptional is because everyone else around him is still being affected by the amnesia wind. If the wind hadn't come at all, these people would not be killing and sacrificing each other. I mean, by the 1990s, human sacrifice had pretty much been eradicated worldwide, so why didn't Sophia's people take that into account before sending the wind? Why does Sophia act like Wataru is the only human being she's ever heard of who's capable of feeling empathy? I think the implication here too is that Sophia's people disapprove of human sacrifice and that our participation in this act is part of the reason why the amnesia wind was sent. But Sophia specifically says at one point that her people have been watching over humanity since our first ancestors crawled out of the sea. So my question is, why then did Sophia's people wait so long to send the wind? Why was it that the amnesia wind was only sent after we stopped sacrificing each other? Like what, her people spent thousands upon thousands of years just watching as various cultures around the world sacrificed their own people, and only decided to step in hundreds of years after the practice had been eradicated? Why did they wait so long? And for that matter, what about all the cultures and religions around the globe that specifically condemned human sacrifice even as it was happening? Why weren't any of them taken into account? Well, I guess those are stupid questions. Wataru and Sophia resume their journey to New York, and while they're traveling, they're attacked once more by the Guardian. The pair ends up falling over the edge of a cliff, and sometime later, Wataru wakes up in a hospital. The doctor tending to him tells Wataru that he sustained no major injuries in the fall, and sorry, why didn't he? That cliff seemed pretty high. I guess maybe the idea is that Sophia used her alien powers to spare him, but this is never actually explained. Wataru just falls off a cliff, and in the next scene he's fine. Understandably, he's pretty confused about what happened, and is doubly confused to meet a doctor who can speak and understand him. Sophia arrives just in time to explain to Wataru that they've ended up in some kind of highly advanced city run by a supercomputer, but for some reason she won't tell him what's going on with the people here. A little while later, a nurse shows up to give Wataru an injection, but before she's able to do so, they're interrupted by a fellow patient who happens to look identical to the doctor from before. The nurse shoos the man out, while Wataru wonders again what's going on in this city. A short time later, he leaves the hospital and does a little exploring. While he's wandering the streets, he happens upon the doctor and nurse from before, this time wearing different clothes and behaving like completely different people. Sophia shows up, but again refuses to explain what's going on. The man then runs up to Wataru and Sophia and states that the mayor would like them to join her for dinner. And I'll give you 3 guesses as to who the mayor turns out to be. If you guessed the same girl from the hospital and the bench, you'd be correct. While they're eating, Wataru asks the mayor if she's aware of the amnesia wind. He also asks her this.
Do you know what happened to the rest of the world 2 years ago?
Oh, yes.
Well then, why do you and Mr. Simpson still have memories? Not only your own, but those of other people as well.
Okay, so apparently that's what's been going on here this whole time. The girl and the old man, who are named Lisa and Mr. Simpson, by the way, were, I guess, implanted with a bunch of different people's memories by the supercomputer that runs the city. How did it do this? What was it hoping to accomplish by doing this? Never explained. Apparently the city used to be full of people, but when the amnesia wind struck, it messed with the supercomputer, which ended up killing almost all of the city's residents. Lisa and Mr. Simpson were the only 2 to survive, but were never told why they were left alive when everyone else was killed. Anyway, Lisa, now acting as the mayor, asks Wataru and Sophia to remain in the city with them so they can rebuild together. She points out the chaos and anarchy of the world outside, and promises her 2 guests an idyllic life if they'll agree to remain within the city. But Wataru and Sophia both refuse, saying they won't submit to the supercomputer. They then ask to speak to the real Lisa and Mr. Simpson. Cut to sometime later at a cemetery. Wataru tries to convince Lisa and Mr. Simpson, who I guess have their own memories now, to come along with him and Sophia. He does manage to convince Lisa, but the old man refuses to consider their offer. However, as the trio leave town, Lisa becomes, I guess, overwhelmed by her borrowed memories and changes her mind. She runs back into the arms of Mr. Simpson, effectively deciding to continue on with her fake, happy existence under the supercomputer's control, rather than facing the harsh light of reality. This is what Sophia has to say about her decision.
The peace and security she has here were too strong to resist. But the important thing is that she chose to stay. It wasn't the computer. She chose for herself. That's a huge step forward. Let's go.
Wataru and Sophia continue on their journey, and we're basically at the end of the film at this point. The two travelers make it to Las Vegas, where Sophia finally tells Wataru who and what she is. She explains to him that while human beings claim to want to be happy, our actions often lead us in the opposite direction. So, her people sent the amnesia wind in order to give humanity the opportunity for a new start. And at this point, I'd like to discuss one of the main themes in the film, which is free will. As we've already seen, Wataru's travels across America have been characterized by two encounters. The encounter with Sue and the false god, and the encounter with Lisa, Mr. Simpson, and the supercomputer. In both situations, Wataru is faced with ways of thinking and living that stand in direct opposition to his own. In Sue's case, we see her and her people being controlled through superstition and spirituality, while in Lisa's and Mr. Simpson's case, we see their lives and wills being subjugated by technology. Wataru does everything he can to help the people he encounters, but his greatest challenge isn't in freeing them from their beliefs. It's in accepting their intrinsic right to choose for themselves what kinds of lives they want to live. And this is something that Sophia really tries to impress upon him all throughout their journey. When Wataru first learns that Sue is to be sacrificed, he's appalled and more or less assumes that she wants to escape her situation. But Sophia challenges him on this and helps lead him to the conclusion that he can't decide Sue's fate for her.
She has the right to live her own life.
Mm-hmm.
What? Have I said something funny?
No. On the contrary, what you just said made perfect sense.
And in the end, despite Wataru's determination to save Sue, she decides for herself to essentially stay true to her beliefs and allow herself to be sacrificed for the greater good. Similarly, although Wataru does everything he can to convince Lisa and Mr. Simpson to leave the supercomputer behind, both are ultimately unwilling to leave its artificial safety. Wataru can't understand why Lisa changes her mind and decides not to accompany them, but Sophia essentially tells him that the point isn't that Lisa made the wrong decision. Well, not entirely anyway. It's that she made the decision for herself, outside of the supercomputer's influence. The point I'm trying to make with all of this is that it's very clear that Sophia wants Wataru to respect the wishes of others and to empower them to make their own decisions. She obviously considers doing so to be a more enlightened way of living than trying to decide what's right for all. But again, as I mentioned before, that's exactly what Sophia's people did when they sent the amnesia wind. Sophia claims that her people sent the wind because they wanted to give humanity a fresh start and a chance to do things right, but none of them seem to have consulted humanity to see if we wanted the fresh start in the first place. Instead, Sophia's people simply imposed their will on humanity by force, which ended up leading to countless deaths, as well as the apocalyptic ruin of human civilization. Every event, including the rise of the false god among Sue's people, as well as the slaughter of the city's residents by the supercomputer, is a direct result of the amnesia wind, and by extension, Sophia's people. But do we ever see Sophia or her people taking responsibility for what they've done to humanity? No, of course not. All they do is meddle in the extreme and then blame human nature for the dystopian world that their meddling caused. Anyway, getting back to the plot, Wataru is understandably not too thrilled to learn that Sophia is one of the aliens who sent the amnesia wind. This causes some tension between the two, but they continue traveling together until they reach New York. Wataru manages to defeat the Guardian robot that's been hunting him since the beginning of the film, and he and Sophia make love before parting ways. Sophia's mothership arrives to take her away, and the film ends with a brief exchange between Wataru and Sophia. Wataru asks if her people will return mankind's memories, and based on everything we've seen so far, you might expect Sophia to tell him that that's going to be humanity's decision, right? All throughout the story, she's been lecturing Wataru about allowing people to choose their own paths and determine their own future, so surely her people will do the same, right? Well, no, of course not. Instead, Sophia reveals that the decision isn't even up to her, but that her higher-ups will be the ones to decide whether or not humanity's memories are restored.
What will happen now? Will you return our memories?
I don't know. Is it better for man to have memories or not? Is there more pain in them or less? Are they more violent or less?
How will you decide?
It's not my decision.
Sophia tells Wataru that she'll report back to her superiors and tell them all she's seen of humanity and planet Earth. She's then beamed up to the mothership while Wataru carries on with his journey across America. And roll credits. So, final thoughts on the film. Well, as I said at the beginning of the video, Sophia's people are without a doubt the most hypocritical alien species I think I've seen in any anime. All throughout the film, Sophia is constantly philosophizing and preaching about the importance of free will, but she's perfectly willing to accept her own race's part in stripping humanity of its free will. Still, though, despite all my nitpicking, I do have a soft spot in my heart for A Wind Named Amnesia. Part of it, I'm sure, is nostalgia, but part of it, too, is just that this movie is so strange and almost dreamlike. Whether you like it or hate it, it's definitely a unique and memorable viewing experience. But that's just my opinion. What do you think of the film? Did you see it? Or have you seen another anime with aliens even more hypocritical than these ones? I'd love to know in the comments. Until then, see you next time.